Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into a topic that's been making waves in academia, generative AI in higher education.
It's definitely been getting a lot of attention, and with good reason. It has the potential to really shake things up.
For sure. And what's especially interesting is that it's a global phenomena. We're not just talking about a few tech-savvy universities in Silicon Valley. We're seeing universities all over the world grappling with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually what makes this study we're looking at today so fascinating. It's a real global snapshot of how universities are responding to the rise of generative AI, or GAI as we'll call it.
Right. The study, published in December 2024 in the journal Computers in Education, Artificial Intelligence, analyzed the approaches of 40 different universities spanning every continent.
It's a pretty comprehensive look at what's happening on the ground, in terms of policies, guidelines, and actual practices.
It's not just theory, it's real-world stuff.
Exactly. And one of the key takeaways is that universities are really trying to figure out how GAI fits into their core mission.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, universities has always been about more than just teaching students how to use the latest technology.
Absolutely. It's about fostering critical thinking, encouraging intellectual curiosity, preparing students for a world that's constantly changing. And now they have to figure out how GAI fits into that.
That's a pretty tall order. So where are they even starting with this?
Well, the study highlights a concept they call compatibility. Basically, universities are trying to ensure that how they use GAI aligns with their existing values and goals. And one of the biggest concerns, understandably, is academic integrity.
Yeah, I mean, the potential for misuse is pretty clear.
Right, take the University of Cambridge, for example. They're taking a very clear stance on this, saying that any AI-generated content used without explicit permission is considered academic misconduct.
Wow, so no sneaking in ChatGPT-written essays. But I imagine it's not all about cracking down on potential cheating.
No, not at all. The study found that universities are actually quite excited about the potential of GAI to enhance teaching and learning.
So they see the good side of it, too.
Definitely. Think about things like personalized feedback for students. Imagine if every student could get tailored guidance on their assignments based on their individual strengths and weaknesses.
That would be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But I also imagine it would be incredibly time-consuming for professors. I mean, how could they possibly do that for every student in every class?
That's where AI comes in. It can automate a lot of those tasks, freeing up professors to focus on, the more human aspects of teaching, like mentoring and facilitating discussions.
Okay, that makes sense. But it's not just about personalized feedback, right? What are some other ways that universities are thinking about using GAI to improve teaching and learning?
Well, there's a lot of interest in using GAI to develop critical thinking skills.
Because just being able to use a tool isn't the same as understanding its limitations.
Exactly. And the study highlights this idea of teaching students to be critical consumers of AI. For instance, the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa has assignments where students have to fact-check AI-generated content.
Oh, wow. So they're not just accepting whatever the AI spits out at face value.
Right. They're learning to question it, to evaluate it, to think for themselves. And that's a really crucial skill in a world where AI is becoming increasingly prevalent.
Absolutely. It's like with any new technology, right?
Yeah.
We need to learn how to use it responsibly and critically.
Exactly. And the study found that universities are also exploring the potential of GAI to make education more inclusive. For example, Cornell University is looking at how to combine AI with the principles of universal design for learning to create more accessible and engaging learning experiences for students with disabilities.
That's amazing. It sounds like there's a real focus on using GAI to benefit all students, not just a select few.
Yeah, I think that's a key takeaway here. Universities are really thinking about the broader societal implications of GAI, not just the impact on their own institutions.
But let's be honest, it's not all sunshine and roses.
Yeah.
Right? There are some serious concerns about data privacy, especially with tools like ChatGPT.
Oh, absolutely. And the study acknowledges that this is a major concern. In fact, the University of California, Berkeley is advocating for a very cautious approach, essentially saying that no sensitive information should be entered into these tools.
That's a pretty strong stance. So it sounds like universities are really trying to balance the potential benefits of GAI with the potential risks, especially when it comes to student data.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
And it's something that universities are going to have to navigate carefully as they figure out how to integrate GAI into their teaching and learning practices.
Right, because it's clear that GAI is here to stay.
It definitely seems that way. And the study suggests that universities are starting to shift from a reactive stance to a more proactive one. They're not just waiting to see what happens, they're actively experimenting with different ways to use GAI in the classroom.
So they're moving from talking about it to actually doing something about it.
Exactly, and that's what the study refers to as trialability. Basically, universities are trying out different approaches to see what works and what doesn't. Like, for instance, the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile is encouraging professors to use AI to help students debug their code or brainstorm research topics.
So they're using AI to support the learning process in very practical ways.
Yes, and the University of Queensland is taking a really structured approach, requiring professors to explicitly state how they're using AI in their courses and what level of AI use is permitted. It's all spelled out right there in the syllabus.
That's a great example of transparency. I mean, students have a right to know how AI is being used in their education. But with all this experimentation going on, how are universities even keeping track of what's working and what's not?
That's a great question, and it leads us into the next key concept the study highlights, which is observability. Basically, how are universities measuring the impact of GAI on learning?
Are they actually evaluating how well these tools are working, or is it more of a, let's just try it and see what happens approach?
Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest.
So some universities are being more rigorous than others.
Exactly. Some are really diving deep into the data, looking at things like student engagement, learning outcomes, really trying to assess the impact of GAI.
Which makes sense. You want to know if these tools are actually helping students learn more effectively.
Right. And the University of Hong Kong is a great example of this. They're experimenting with new assessment methods and gathering feedback from both students and faculty to see if AI is actually making a difference.
Okay, so some universities are really taking a data-driven approach. But what about the ones that maybe don't have the same resources or expertise? Can they keep up with all of this?
That's a really important question, and it's something that the study raises as a potential concern. Is this level of rigorous evaluation scalable? Can all universities, regardless of their size or resources, keep up with the rapid pace of AI development? It's something to think about.
It definitely is, because we don't want to see a situation where only a handful of elite universities are able to fully leverage the potential of GAI, while others are left behind.
Right. And that's why I think it's so important to have these conversations. We need to talk about the challenges, the opportunities, the ethical considerations. We need to share best practices and support each other.
Because ultimately, this isn't just about technology, it's about education. It's about preparing students for the future.
And that's something we all have a stake in.
It really is a complex issue with a lot of moving parts. And it sounds like communication is key here.
Oh, absolutely. Universities are recognizing that they need to be very intentional about communicating with everyone involved, faculty, students, staff, the whole community.
Yeah, because if you're going to implement something as potentially disruptive as GAI, you want to make sure everyone's on board.
Exactly. And the study found that universities are using a variety of different approaches to get the message out. Websites, webinars, even dedicated social media groups.
So they're really trying to meet people where they are.
Right. Like, take the University of Edinburgh, for example. They're planning to create a whole website devoted to AI in education. All the latest research, best practices, a one-stop shop for information and guidance.
That sounds like a really valuable resource.
Yeah.
But I imagine it's not just about providing information. It's also about creating spaces for dialogue, right?
Oh, for sure. It's not just about telling people what to do. It's about having conversations, listening to concerns, working together to find solutions.
That's where the real learning happens.
Exactly. And it can be a challenging process, but it's also really important because when it comes to GAI, there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right. Every university is going to have to figure out what works best for them, their students, their faculty, their unique context.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial aspect that the study highlights, and that's the idea of roles and responsibilities.
Right, because it's not like one person can just handle all of this on their own. Right.
No way. This is definitely a team effort. And the study found that universities are starting to define clear roles and responsibilities for different stakeholders when it comes to GAI.
Okay, so who's responsible for what? Give me the breakdown.
Well, for starters, faculty members are tasked with integrating AI into their courses.
Which means they need to be familiar with the technology itself, right?
Yeah, to some extent. But it's not just about knowing how to use the tools. It's also about understanding the pedagogical implications. How can these tools be used to enhance teaching and learning? What are the ethical considerations?
It's a lot to think about.
It is, but it's really important work. And then, of course, there are the students.
Right, because ultimately it's about their education.
Exactly. And students have a responsibility to use these tools ethically and responsibly.
Which probably requires some guidance and education on their part as well.
For sure. And then you have administrators who are playing a key role in developing policies and providing support and resources to both faculty and students.
So it's a collaborative effort. Everyone has a part to play.
Exactly. And that's a key takeaway from this study. It's not just about the technology, it's about people. It's about working together to ensure that GAI is used responsibly and ethically in the context of higher education.
Well said. And I think that's a really important point to emphasize. This isn't just some abstract technological debate. It has real-world consequences for students, for faculty, for the future of education.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important to be having these conversations, to be thinking critically about the implications of GAI, to be proactive in shaping how this technology is used in education.
It's definitely a lot to consider. And it sounds like we're just scratching the surface of this topic. It feels like we've only just begun to explore this. We've already covered so much ground.
I know, right? It's such a fast-moving field, and there are so many different angles to consider, but that's what makes it so fascinating.
For sure. It's definitely a topic that's going to keep us all on our toes. So, looking ahead, what are some of the biggest challenges you see for universities as they try to navigate the world of GAI?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is going to be keeping up with the pace of change. I mean, new GAI tools and applications are emerging all the time.
It's like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly. And that means universities need to be agile and adaptable. They can't just create a policy and then sit back and relax. They need to be constantly evaluating new developments, revising their guidelines, and adjusting their strategies as needed.
It's almost like they need to build a culture of continuous learning, not just for their students, but for the institution as a whole.
I love that analogy. It's so true. And I think that might be one of the most profound impacts of GI on higher education, this shift in mindset from, seeing knowledge as something that's fixed and static to something that's constantly evolving.
Yeah, that's a big shift. It's not always easy for institutions that are, often steeped in tradition to embrace that kind of change.
It's definitely a challenge, but I think it's also an incredible opportunity to rethink what education should look like in the 21st century. What skills and knowledge do students need to thrive in a world where AI is ubiquitous? How can we prepare them for jobs that don't even exist yet?
It's like we're moving beyond the traditional model of education as simply the transmission of information to something more focused on critical thinking, problem-solving, creativity, those skills that AI can't replicate.
You got it. And those are the skills that will be most valuable in the long run, no matter what the future holds. So maybe instead of viewing GAI as a threat to education, we should see it as a catalyst for its evolution.
I love that perspective. It's not about replacing teachers or devaluing human knowledge. It's about finding ways to leverage these powerful tools to enhance the learning experience, make it more engaging, more personalized, more effective.
Exactly. And I think it's important to remember that at the end of the day, it's all about the students. It's about preparing them to be successful in their lives, their careers, their communities.
And to be engaged, informed citizens who can contribute to society in meaningful ways.
Absolutely. And I believe that GAI has the potential to help us achieve that if we use it wisely and thoughtfully.
Well said. This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive into a topic that's clearly still unfolding. To our listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think the future holds for higher education in an AI-powered world? What are your hopes? What are your concerns?
Share your perspectives with us online, and let's continue the conversation.
And until next time, keep diving deep.